Father, we thank you for allowing us to come to your house of worship today. We thank you for all your many blessings you bestowed upon us. We also thank you for giving us the opportunity to return a portion of what you've given us. In your Son's holy, precious name, we thank you. Amen.
All my life, God, you have been good. Just want to sing that. Sing together. Don't look. Don't. Nope. Can't find it. The serpent's up. Love you, Lord. I love you, Lord. I love you. is running after me. Your goodness, Lord. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after us. And Lord, that goodness is all we need. Our life. Yes, through. Sing, Lord, I come. I need you. Lord, I come. I confess. Bowing here, I find my rest. And without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found, where you are, is where you are. And where you are, I am free. Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, when I cannot stand, I'll call on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. When I cannot stand, I'll call on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you.
Papa,
Yeah.
this is how you spell your name.
Yeah.
D and
D-I-G. It says D-I-G. It says dig. Destination dig. D-I-G.
so that name. So that spells Bill.
No, that's B-I-L-L. Every hour I need you, my woman defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. see you in a minute, okay?
Trials and the tribulations, we need you, that strong tower that we can run into, Father. We just cry out every day, every hour. We need you. As we talk about transformation and how it happens in our life, our work, Father, we pray that we would just seek you first above all things. Praise your precious Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Go ahead and be seated. I'm so glad that you are here this morning, and we are ending our 50 days of transformation, and I found my iPad. It was right where I left it, yeah. It was always the last place I looked. All right, where's your drumsticks at, boy? I was coming over and unlocking the gate, and I thought, this is a great place to just lay this iPad down, because I had 3 coffee cups in my hands, and I laid it down on the trash dumpster. Thank goodness the trash people didn't come. And as I ran into the kitchen and was talking with Rick and praying, and Lord, please help me find this. I walked out of the back door, and there it was, sitting on the back of the thing. And of course, it all comes back to me. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was going to have to look at paper. Boy, that's really bad when you have to look at paper. Well, I know that's what it is. You wouldn't believe how many pages are there. It looks smaller when you're. No, anyway, I am so glad that we've come to completion of our 50 days of this transformation. Like I said during the announcements, I've been transformed. Over the last 50 days, we've looked at 7 different key areas of your life. We'll be looking at that 8th key, but the first thing that we looked at was physical health, and then spiritual health, and emotional health. We looked at relational health, and then last week we had looked at the financial health, our financial health. And we've looked at all these different areas, and today we're going to be looking at vocational health, or the health that we have at our workplaces and our jobs, and this ability to dream that God has given to us. I'm going to be talking about that. God has given you the ability to dream. He has not given that to animals. You don't see cats sitting around dreaming about, well, what am I going to do with my other 8 lives that I'm going to be here? They just don't do that, or a dog saying, well, I really got to get my IRA done, and I need to get this thing settled. You don't see animals do that. God has given that to you because you're special. You're created in God's image. And if you don't have a dream, you know what? You're just coasting. And if you're coasting, how do you coast? You're going downhill. That's the way it is. You need to have a dream. God has put a dream on every one of your hearts, and He wants you to fulfill that dream. He put a dream on my heart to one day be a music director, to be in service to God's church, and I was able to do that. Later on in my ministry, He put a dream that I would be to actually be a pastor of the church. I didn't really want to go down in status, but I said, okay, Lord, I'll be a pastor. No, I'm kidding. But it has been, God has, through my life, given me different dreams, and there's always problems that come along with those dreams, and they're like giants that pop up. And so today we're going to be talking about a story about a giant, and many of you know this story that I'm talking about. This giant named Goliath, and how David had to face Goliath. And there's kind of Goliath problems in everything we do. Your Goliath might be financial problems, it might be emotional problems, it might be relational problems, it could even be problems with your health. There is a giant of health, when we get right down to it. So what do you do when you face these giants? And that's really what I want to focus in on. How do you face the giants? First of all, how do you know what's going on? But before we do that, I could have told you this story that Malcolm is going to give to you in the video here in just a second. But this story about it, but I thought it would be better for you to see it. But before we go into that, this Malcolm Gladwell, he's written 4 New York Times best-selling books, and he wrote a story about David and Goliath. And it's called Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. And I would rather you look at that. But before we go to that, I want to read to you the text for today. It's found in 1 Samuel 17. And we'll just start right there. It says, now the Philistines had gathered their forces for war. They occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath from Gath came out of the Philistine camp. He was a giant of a man. Now, one translation says that Goliath was 9 feet tall, another 7 feet tall. In other words, he was a pretty big dude. You know, he was wearing a huge bronze helmet and a coat of bronze armor that weighed over 125 pounds. So in other words, this guy's pretty big. He also wore bronze leggings and slung a huge bronze javelin over his back. The iron spearhead alone on this javelin weighed 15 pounds. And the soldier with a large shield always walked in front of Goliath. So take a listen to Malcolm Gladwell here explain to you this situation. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's an incredible honor to be asked to come and participate in the service today. Before I started, I had a little bit of a moral dilemma on my way in. I was looking to park, and I was going to cheat a bit and try and get closer to the church. So I pulled into one of the reserved lots, and one of the spaces said, reserved for weekend pastor. And I thought, technically, I'm not a pastor, but it is the weekend. And I will be standing up here and preaching. So I parked. So just wanted to get that out of the way, off my chest. So Pastor Rick asked me to come and to introduce the lesson today, which is about one of the most famous of all the stories in the Bible, the duel between David and Goliath. And it's a story that has enormous interest to me. It was the story that inspired my latest book, and I've thought a lot about it. And it fascinates me because it's a story with all kinds of unexpected depth and complexity. So many of you know the basic outlines of the story, which is that there is this duel 3,000 years ago in Palestine. And that's probably the best place to start, because it's important to understand a little bit about the geography of ancient Palestine to put that story in context. Palestine, in fact, Israel even today, has a mountain range that runs down its eastern border. And in the mountains are all of the traditional, most famous cities of Israel: Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Hebron. And then the western half of the country is a flat coastal plain that borders on the Mediterranean, and that's where Tel Aviv is today. And in between the plain and the mountains, there's an area called the Shephelah. And the Shephelah is a series of valleys and ridges that run east to west that connect the plain with the mountains. And if you've ever been to Israel, you'll know that that is just about the most beautiful part of the country. It's incredibly gorgeous. These are valleys filled with oak trees and with vineyards and with wheat fields. It is also, though, the most strategically crucial part of the country, because the valleys are the means by which people living in the plains can advance into the mountains. And so time and time again over the course of history, battles have been fought for control of Israel in the Shephelah. And that's exactly what happens 3,000 years ago with the Philistines and the Israelites. The Philistines are the historic enemies of the kingdom of Israel, and they are a people who occupy the plain. They came from Crete, they're a seafaring people, and they were living in and around what is now Tel Aviv. And they decide they want to go and conquer the kingdom of Israel, which is clustered in the mountains. And so they start to climb up through one of those valleys. And King Saul, who is the king of Israel at that moment, catches wind of what the Philistines are doing and brings his army down from the mountains to meet the Philistines. And the two sides meet in an area of the Shephelah called the Valley of Elah. And the Israelites dig in along the northern ridge, and the Philistines dig in along the southern ridge, and the two armies start staring. They just look at each other because it's a standoff. neither can attack the other, because to attack, you'd have to come down the ridge, onto the valley floor, and then up the other side. And as you were doing that, you would expose yourself to your enemy, right? So it's a deadlock. And they sit there for weeks, just kind of looking at each other. And finally, the Philistines have had enough. And they send a mighty warrior, a giant, down onto the valley floor. And he challenges the Israelites to send a mighty warrior of their own, and they will duke it out. They will settle the conflict in a one-on-one combat. And this is something that was a tradition in ancient times. It was done all the time. It's called single combat. 2 warriors from each side would fight on behalf of their armies, and each army would accept the outcome. So this giant's standing there in the valley floor, basically saying, come on, who's going to take me on? And no one on the Israelite side has the guts to take him on. He's too big. He's ferocious. He's got outfitted top to bottom in all kinds of, you heard the account of all of the incredible armor he's got. He's 7 foot tall, or maybe even more than that. I mean, he's really a terrifying figure. Nobody will take him on, except for this kid who comes up to King Saul and says, I'll do it. And Saul looks at him and says, you're insane. You're a child. You can't take on a 7-foot warrior. And the kid says, well, actually, I'm not a kid. I'm a shepherd. I've done some time out there in the fields. I've killed some lions in my day. I'm not pathetic. Saul's like, no, you're not going. And the kid says, well, no, actually, I really want to do it. And Saul realizes that he doesn't have a choice because no one else is volunteering, right? This is all he has. So he's like, all right. And he tries to give the kid his armor. He says, look, take this, so at least you've got some preparation for going up against the giant. And the kid says, no, not doing it. Instead, what he does is he reaches down and he picks up a couple of stones from the ground. He puts them in his pouch, and he marches down the side of the hill with a shepherd's staff and this little bag of rocks. Right? And the giant is looking at him and says, come to me so I might feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Meaning he's like, come on over, I'm gonna chew you up, right? And the boy gets closer, and the giant sees that doesn't have a sword and a shield. All he has is this shepherd's staff and this little bag, and the giant's insulted. He's the biggest warrior in all of ancient Palestine, and here they've sent a kid up against him. And he says, am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks, right? Referring to the staff. And the kid gets even closer, and the kid says, no, I come to you in the name of the Lord God Almighty. And he reaches into his bag and he takes out one of those rocks and he puts it into his sling and he whirls it around, and the rock goes forward and it hits the giant right here between the eyes. And the giant falls over, and the boy runs up to him and grabs his sword and chops off his head, and Israel wins the day. And the Philistines turn around and they go running all the way back to the coastal plain, right? That is the story of David and Goliath. The kid is David and the giant is Goliath, and we've all heard that story 1,000 times. And the reason I got really interested in it when I was writing my book is that the closer I looked at the story, the more I realized that I and many of us had fundamentally misinterpreted what it meant. So we use that story as a kind of metaphor for stories about improbable victories, right? The overwhelming favorite goes up against the 1 in a million long shot, and the 1 in a million long shot wins the day. Now, why do we call David a 1 in a million long shot? Well, one reason is that he's a kid. He's a shepherd, and he's up against an experienced warrior. Second reason is he's normal-sized, probably my size, skinny and tiny and sort of very unassuming. And he's up against a guy who's 7 foot at least, right? But the biggest reason we think of David as being this improbable long shot is that Goliath is decked out in head-to-toe armor and has got every weapon known to ancient warriors in his hands, and all David has is a sling. Well, that's a good place to start, because I think that's where we go wrong. Let's start with that phrase, all David has is a sling. Ancient armies had 3 kinds of warriors. They had They had people who rode in chariots, cavalry, right? People on horseback and in chariots. They had heavy infantry, which is foot soldiers wearing armor, full body armor, and carrying swords and shields. And they had artillery. And artillery was made up of people with bows and arrows and slingers. Slingers were trained artillery who used a sling. And a sling was a leather pouch which had 2 long ropes attached to it. And you would put a rock in the middle of the pouch and you would whirl it around like this and let one of the ropes go. And so the rock would be propelled forward. Right? Very often when people tell the story of David and Goliath, they make it sound like David had a slingshot, right? Like it's some kind of child's toy. Slingshots are not deadly weapons. If they were, most parents would be dead by now. David did not have a slingshot. He had a sling, and a sling is a very, very different and far more lethal weapon. We have people who've studied slings, and there are, as is the case with most interesting things in the world, a group of sling nerds out there who have done all the calculations. We know that an experienced slinger would rotate that sling 6 or 7 times a second, which means if you do the math, that the rock would be traveling at 35 meters per second. So if Goliath is 100 feet from David, the rock will reach Goliath in less than a second. Right? Goliath barely knows what's happening, and boom, it's hitting him in the middle of the head. Now, the second interesting thing is that the rock that David used was probably what's called barium sulfate, which is common in the Valley of Elah. And it's a very heavy rock. And if you do the math on the ballistics of that rock had a stopping power equal to a bullet from a .45 caliber handgun, right? This is a serious weapon. Now, what about accuracy? Well, we know from other discussions of slingers in the Bible, and also from discussions in medieval warfare, that experienced slingers, and David was an experienced slinger, were incredibly accurate. They could hit birds in flight with their sling. Right? So there is no question that what David has is a weapon that is entirely capable of taking out Goliath. In fact, in ancient warfare, slingers were routinely used to match up against heavy infantry. That's what you rolled out when you were faced with a bunch of people who were dressed head to toe in armor with swords and shields. So there's Goliath. He's heavy infantry. And what he expects is he's going to have a battle with another heavy infantryman. Then when he says, come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, the key phrase is come to me, meaning come right here because we're going to have hand-to-hand combat. But David's not an idiot. He's not going to go in hand-to-hand combat with a guy who's twice his size. He's going to use the weapon that he spent his career as a shepherd trading with, which is a sling. So here we have a guy who has changed the rules of combat without telling his opponent, has superior technology, and is filled with the Spirit of the Lord, right? And yet we insist on calling him an underdog. Why? Isn't he the favorite? You've got superior technology, and you've changed the rules without telling your opponent, and you have God in your heart. That doesn't make you the favorite? Second interesting thing about that story. It's not just the case that we seem to have radically underestimated David's power. It's also that we've misunderstood Goliath. Goliath is supposed to be this mighty warrior, right? But the truth is, if you read that passage in 1 Samuel about the battle between David and Goliath, there are all kinds of things, details that are completely inconsistent with that idea of Goliath as this indomitable warrior. The first is that he's led onto the valley floor by an attendant. Someone brings him down to the point where the fight's supposed to take place, right? That doesn't make any sense. If he's the greatest warrior in all of Palestine, why is he being led by the hand like a preschooler crossing the street, right? Second thing is that the biblical account stresses how slowly Goliath moves, right? Why is a great fearsome, ferocious warrior moving.
And I'm afraid that's where it sticks. I thought it was going to get through that. Well, what he's about to say is that as Goliath is moving slowly, they have found out by endocrinologists, and I'm doing this all from memory because I didn't expect that, that most giants suffer from a form of tumor that sits itself on the pituitary gland and causes growth hormone, and that's why they grow so big. And the fact is that it talks about Goliath being able to look. He's walking real slow. Why is he walking slow? Because it's affecting his eyesight. People with amalgam, I can't remember exactly how it is. It has this problem because it also begins to push on the optic nerve, and so most likely Goliath is having problem with vision. And so he's moving slowly. He's got an attendant bringing him onto the field because he doesn't want to fall down. He doesn't want to trip on a rock. He says, okay, we're going to fight, and you're going to come up here, and I can see you good. And then you remember that David comes, he gets closer, and then he looks and he says, why are you sending out, this kid, what am I, a dog that you send him out with sticks? Well, David has one stick. He doesn't have two sticks. And so all of a sudden, we realize that he's got double vision. And that Goliath is not as a fearsome a warrior as everybody thinks. And from the valley, as the Israelites are looking down, they see this giant of a man, and they're scared to death of a guy that can't hardly walk, that doesn't really see, and oftentimes, and doesn't have the Spirit of God with him. Oftentimes, we look at these giant problems and we find out that they're not really as big of giants as we thought they were, or as powerful as they are. And that's really the story that Malcolm is helping us to understand, that a boy who has this power, that he wasn't an underdog, he was the favorite, and he has this power of God in his life, was far more of a match to Goliath than anything else. And so we find that there are all these giants that we face in life. And that's why I wanted to play you that, was because sometimes we find these common giants, like giant financial problems, or giant relational problems, or marriage problems, work problems that keep you going after your dream. All of these giants seem to pop up in our life. And in 1 Samuel 17, David actually had to fight 4 other giants before he got to Goliath. They weren't physical giants, but they were giants in his mind. And you're far more likely to face these kind of giants in your life than the kind of giant that David had to face in the end, which was Goliath. When it comes to fulfilling your dream, or fulfilling God's dream that he's put into your heart. So let me give you a little background about what's going on here in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We look back at 1 Samuel chapter 16, and there's an interesting story there. There's a guy by the name of Samuel, and he's the prophet. He is the chief religious person of the day. And he was sent. God says, all right, Samuel, I want you to go to Bethlehem, and I want you to go to a guy by the name of Jesse, and we are going to have you get my next king. You're gonna find my king for him. You're gonna anoint one of Jesse's sons to be king, the next king of Israel. And of course, Saul is still alive, very much alive. But Samuel understands this is all quiet, secret. It's a secret plan. And so he goes out there and he finds Jesse, and he says, "All right, Jesse, I need to see your son, because God's wanting to do something special here." And Jesse says, "Well, I don't have just one son. I got 8 sons." And so okay, well, bring me the sons. And so he goes through them. 1, yeah, not him. 2, oh, he's not him. All the way through to number 7. And he says, okay, it's obviously God says not one of these. And he says, "Don't you got any other sons?" He says, "Well, I got the scrawny kid that's out taking care of the sheep." He says, "Well, call him in." And so David comes in. He said, "That's the one. That's the one. And so he anoints him king of Israel, the next king of Israel. And then we find out what happens. Nothing. Nothing happens after that, other than Jesse saying, hey, kid, get back out with the sheep. You need to be out there with the sheep. So, when you face giants, like these giants that David had to face, the first thing that you're going to face when you're trying to fulfill your dream, you're following God, is number one, and that'll be the next slide up. Number one is delay. That's the other giants that David had to face. Delay. His dad held him back. The first giant was this delay. No dream is fulfilled instantly. I don't know if you've seen that or not. God gives you a dream on one day, but it doesn't get fulfilled the next day. It happened many, many years later that God fulfilled this dream in David's life. My dream to go to school and become a music pastor, become a worship pastor, I thought I was fulfilling it by finding a church that needed a person, and I jumped. And God said, no, I want you to go. God wanted me in the delay. But boy, did I make a mistake. That was the dumbest thing I ever did. But God used it to get me back on track. So delay is going to be there. There will be a time lapse. There will be a waiting period. And in David's case, his dad was holding him back. And why? Because he needed David out there, taking care of the sheep. He wanted David. He didn't. Here's the truth. Jesse didn't want to lose a worker. You don't need to do that. You go out there, and most likely, let me pick it up here in 12 to 15. It says this: Now David was the youngest of Jesse's 8 sons. His 3 older brothers enlisted in Saul's army, but David was held back. To what? Circle that. To care for the sheep in Bethlehem. Jesse says, no, you get back there. You need to be working on sheep. You don't need to be going with your brothers. And so David's father didn't want to lose his sheep herder. And sometimes when you're dealing with these things in your life, a dream that you have, you go into this room, this delay, this waiting room, because God is putting together things. And there will be people in your life that will want to hold you back. You need to understand that. And here's really the sad part, is sometimes those people are the ones that love you, the ones that love you most. And in this case, it was David's dad. He says, get back there, get to the sheep. And then when God has a plan for your life, there's another issue. God may have a plan for your life, but so does everybody else. I don't know if you've run into that. Okay, well, God's got a plan for you, and so here's how you do it. Listen to me. I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it. Don't do that. You follow God's plan, not somebody else's plan for your life. Because if you try to do it by way of somebody else, it will fail every time. You have to do it God's way. So you follow the plans that God has for you. So we get back to the story. Jesse sends his 3 sons out to fight the Philistines, and he tells David, hey, run, get over here. I've got this food for your brothers, the real warriors. I want you to take it over to the battle. You get over there and you give your brothers this. Don't mess around. Get over there and get this food to them. And so off David goes to the battlefield, and this is how he gets to see what's going on out there. And so when he's delivering this food to his older brothers, he hears Goliath. He hears this taunt, because what was Goliath doing? He's coming out twice a day, taunting the Israelites. And David notices that, hey, nobody is doing anything about this big knucklehead. Why isn't that? He's looking around, he noticed that everybody's just scared to death. They're shaking in their armor. They're all embarrassed because they're afraid. They're being terrorized. They're traumatized. And nobody wants to do anything. So they're all scared to death, and that's where the second barrier comes in. You will always face this one when you're in the process of finding and fulfilling your dream. The first one is delay. The second one is discouragement. And so write that down. Number 2, everyone was afraid. They were discouraged. They were all afraid. The reason that you're going to face discouragement is because everybody else around you is scared to death. They don't think you can do it. They say, well, Nobody around you has hope that you'll be able to fulfill that dream. Nobody believes that you could take down this giant. They're all scared to death, and they're all convincing each other of that fact. Oh, man, look how big he is. He can never, we can never defeat that. No, man, don't even think about it. You can't defeat this guy. And so they're compounding this fear with each other. And that's exactly how the Philistines, what they did to the Israelites, was they sent this big giant out there that couldn't see, that could hardly move. And it was working. He was scaring all these people. And probably if there would have been somebody that got close to this gigantic guy, he might have got a hold of him and literally killed him. But that's not what David did. So 1 Samuel 17, 8 through 10, it says this: each day Goliath would stand and shout at the ranks of Israel's army, "Why do you come out here and line up for battle? Choose one man to fight me, and if he's able to kill me, we'll become your subjects. But if I kill him, you'll become our subjects and serve us." Day after day, circle that, day after day, Goliath taunted them, saying, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel." And when Saul, that's the king, when Saul and the Israelites heard this, everyone was deeply shaken and paralyzed with fear. Notice the situation. They're all demoralized. They're gripped with anxiety. They're terrified. They're traumatized. They feel hopeless. And one translation says it this way: they were so frightened they couldn't do anything. You ever been like that? You ever been so frightened you couldn't do anything? Have you ever been in a situation where you look around and everything seems to be hopeless? Maybe people in your office or where you work said, "Oh, you can never do that. You can never get that done. That just don't even try. Don't waste the company's time. Don't." And it's because everybody feels hopeless. They might say, "Well, we can't solve this problem." And they're all discouraging each other. They're convincing each other that nothing can be done. And, I'm going to tell you something important here. Conventional wisdom is often wrong. Conventional wisdom is often wrong. Oh, this is the conventional wisdom. This little scrawny guy is not going to defeat a 9-foot-tall giant. Well, they were wrong. It says twice in that passage that Goliath challenged the ranks of Israel's army. And you know what? Sometimes it takes somebody outside of the ranks to shake up the thing and fix it. And that's exactly what happened here. This little kid, from the villages coming up and says, "Hey, we can do this. We can beat this big knucklehead." He had a fresh set of eyes. He looked out, and he knew that the professionals were wrong. The crowd was wrong. Just because everybody says it's so doesn't make it so. The crowd is often wrong. Just because the crowd says it's true. And we see this, the crowd of the internet, the crowd of social media. Just because they say something's true, it's not true. You don't believe them. You should challenge the status quo. And that's exactly what little David did. He challenged the status quo. They're listening to the wrong voice. These guys, they're listening to this guy every single day, taunting them. And again, in verse 16, it says, for 40 days, twice a day, this morning and evening, the Philistine giant loudly berated the Israelite army. It's no wonder they got discouraged. They're listening to this guy day after day. That's why they have people put out this disinformation, in battle time. Oh, you shouldn't. Oh, your country doesn't care about you. They've just sent you out here to die. You should just give up. All this, this crazy. I can't remember the woman that in Tokyo that was taunting the soldiers back in World War II. It's the same thing. Tokyo Rose, that's her name. And every day she came out because it is a kind of a mental warfare, and that's exactly what this Philistine, this giant was doing, Goliath was doing. So I got a question for you. Who are you listening to when they say it can't be done? Who are you listening to? Who is poo-pooing your dream, putting down your dream, saying, well, it ain't never going to happen, just forget it. Who's telling you that you're just not the person to take on that dream? Let me tell you what. If you listen to negative people long enough, negativity is highly contagious. And guess what? Guess what happens? You catch it. All of a sudden, you've been around negative people all the time, you're going to be a negative person. You know, maybe one of the best things that you should stop doing is listening to negative people. You know, give it up. You know, a negative, bitter person is someone, if you listen to that person every single day of your life, you will be a negative, bitter person. And negativity is contagious, and so is fear, and so is discouragement. It all works together. 1 Samuel 17, 23 and 24. As David talked with his brothers on the front line, he saw Goliath start shouting his usual threats to the Israel's army. When the army heard Goliath, they all ran away in terror. They had him. They all ran away. Think about that. Let me give you some advice. You become what you're surrounded with. If you surround yourself with a bunch of cowards, guess what? You'll be a coward. If you hang around with a bunch of bitter people, you'll be bitter. You hang around with angry people, guess what? You're going to be an angry person. You hang around with negative people, you will be negative. It's highly contagious. So, going back, the first barrier to your dream is delay. The second barrier is discouragement. Now let's get to the third barrier. And here it is, disapproval. That's the third barrier. His brother questioned his motives. You know, what a good big brother. Just like your big brother, Alex. What a good big brother. You know, he was a dream buster. You know, this giant of disapproval. David had to handle, you know, and had to be willing to face the disapproval of the people around him in order to go after his dream of defeating Goliath. And when it comes to your dream, you'll have to too. So here's the problem. The reason why most people don't ever go after their dream is because they're afraid of disapproval and rejection. In this case, David's own brother, somebody supposed to love him, questions his motives and disapproves of him going after the giant. Here's the truth. And it's true for me, and it's true for you. We want everybody to like us. We want them to put likes on our posts. We want them to approve of everything we do. But if you go after God's dream in your life, you're going to, here's what's going to happen. I'll guarantee this. There's going to be naysayers. They're going to say, you can't do it. There's going to be critics. There's going to be misunderstanding. There will be attacks. There will be people who are judging you for what you do because they don't get it. And that is this disapproval giant. That's what this is all about. And so his brother, what does he do? He demeans him. He disregards him. He belittles him. And in these verses 28 and 29, listen to the conversation between the older brother and the younger brother. And I want you to listen to this conversation and see if maybe you could identify that in your family. Here it is. Why are you even here anyway? Why aren't you out taking care of your scrawny little flock of sheep, you cocky little brat? I know how conceited you are. And, David, he's the younger brother. He says, now what have I done? Can't I even ask a question? So does that seem familiar to you? Have you ever heard those kind of conversations in your houses? Usually it was me against Alex doing that kind of stuff. But it's true. It is a way that we act in families, and I don't know why it is. We tend to be our worst critics of those that we say that we love, that we're supposed to love. And oftentimes, and that's the sad truth, it's the family that doesn't want you to accomplish God's dream. I'm going to tell you a little story. I wanted to do this. I wanted to put music in my life. I wanted to be able to support my family, do music. This was before, Wynn and I were dating, before we were married. And so I began taking college classes. And my father said to me, I know what you're doing. You're just going over there to play around. That's the words he used all the time. Just play around, so that you're not working on these vehicles that I need you to work on for me. If I would have listened to him, I would be working on cars. Wait a minute, I'm still working on cars. But I wouldn't be doing what God wanted me to do with my life. If you listen to those around you, demoralize you and try to steal your dream away from you, you will never get anywhere in life. You can't listen to the naysayers. When you're faced with a dream, you need to make it a God-sized dream. Always dream bigger than you could possibly ever accomplish on your own. You know, I want you to dream the kind of dream that if God doesn't show up and help you, you're going to end up on that YouTube channel that Michael loves so much called Epic Fail. That's where you'll be, you know, if God doesn't show up. You have to dream the kind of dream that people are going to ask you, well, who do you think you are? That's the kind of dream. That's the God-sized goal that God wants you to have in your life. You know, when it comes to that kind of a dream, people are going to, you know, they're going to be afraid. They're gonna say you can't do it. They're going to demoralize you, and you're going to be misjudged. You'll be maligned. You'll be misinterpreted. You'll be misunderstood, and that is the giant of disapproval. You have to decide what matters more to you: the approval of people or the approval of God. I learned a long time ago. I want God's approval and wins. I want God's approval, not just my own. I am much more happy when God's happy with me than if anybody else is happy with me. So I'm going to always look towards Him. So there's a fourth issue that we face. So we've got delay, we've got disapproval, we've got disappointment, and then this fourth dream buster that we're looking at is finally doubt. Doubt. You know, doubt. The expert doubted his ability. So what happens here? You know, this is when people all around you say you can't do it. You know, David, in his case, the expert doubted that he could actually have the ability to take on Goliath. Who was the expert? The expert was King Saul. You know, King Saul, he was a professional soldier his whole life. He if anybody knew the profession of war making, it was Saul. And so when David came, Saul said, "Man, you can't do it. Yeah, I doubt. There's no way you can do this." And as you heard Malcolm talk about the fact that, you know, get out of here, kid. You're not going to be able to do this. And so David goes to Saul, and here's the conversation in 1 Samuel 17, 32 and 33. "Don't worry about a thing," David told the king. "I'll fight the Philistine." You know, can you imagine? I'm surprised. I imagine that the king probably laughed about that. But, you know, before I go any further, I want to say this. Confidence in God is often misinterpreted by people as cockiness. You know, a lot of people might think a person is cocky when they're just a person of faith. You know, when they know they can't do it, but they know that God can do something. And so don't ever think that people that are people of faith are being cocky, because they're trusting God to do this. And this is exactly what David says here. You know, it may be, you know, to somebody that doesn't know God's word, yeah, that little snot, he's sure being cocky. This big old giant guy's going to tear him up. "Don't worry about a thing, king. I'll take on this Philistine." And Saul replied, "Don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can go against this Philistine. You're only a boy," and he's been a professional warrior all of his life. Well, that expert, he's an expert. He said, you can't do it. It won't work. You know, throws this doubt in here. But just like I said about conventional wisdom, remember that? It's often wrong. So are the experts. The experts are often wrong. So how do you defeat the giants that are keeping you from being the man of God that you want to be, from being the woman of God that you want to be, from fulfilling that great dream that God has given you? You know, how do you overcome these giants? Well, there's 4 other things that David did here, and we'll get through those really quickly. He did these 4 things, and this is under how to defeat giants. So the first thing that David did was he said, you know, I remember how God has helped me in the past. Now, that's always the first thing that you have to do when you are out there and you're facing these giants, is that you remember that God has done things in your past. I had to remember that. There are times when I didn't know what I was going to do. I look back, you know, I think about one of the things, just real quickly, I said I'm going to go to school, I'm going to Cal Baptist, I'm going to, you know, follow the dream that God has given to me. And I sat down with Wynn, and the church was all, yeah, this is it. We're going to have a big party for you, and we're going to send you off. And so Wynn and I sat down, and we're looking at the finances, and we said, hey, there's no way we can go. They're going to have a party for us. Wynn, did you hear that? They're going to have a party, and we can't go because we got these bills that I was not able to pay. And so we went over there kind of sheepishly. We were going to, I just couldn't do it, because they were just so good to us. And what we didn't know was that they had decided to put up this thing called a money tree. People say that money doesn't grow on trees. Well, on this tree, some money grew on it because people pinned money on that tree. And we took this money and we got home and we laid it all out, and to the penny, it covered everything that we needed so that we could go. God has helped me in the past. I remember when I graduated college, and I thought, here's this big church I'm in Fontana, and I love this place. And the pastor, he retires, and all of a sudden I realized that I'm not going to be able to stay there. And doubt comes in, and problems come in. And we had to move to, Alex was living with his wife on a ranch, and we moved into a motorhome, me and my 2 little girls. And I was beside myself. I thought, God, you're done with me. Here, I just finished college, and I've got no work. I've got no church. What am I going to do? And I remember Wynn and I got into argument, because a lot of times when you're going through that kind of problems, you beat up on the one that you love the most. No, I don't mean beat up. You have arguments with the one that you love the most. And I ran off in the car and drove around and just was so upset and angry and having God speak to me. Guess what happened the very next day? A guy by the name of Doc Patton from a little church up here in Chico calls me up and says, hey, Bill, what do you think about coming up here and being the music pastor? That's what God does. So I can remember those. Just like that, you remember what God has done for you in the past. God always shows up. And if you do that, you will find that He is there to give you plenty of examples. And if He did it while you were in such pain and such hardship and took care of you, and maybe it was even little things, don't you think He can take care of the big things? Don't you think? Remember, God has helped you in the past. And that's really exactly what David did here. He says this in verse 36, in protecting my sheep, David the shepherd, I've killed both a lion and a bear. The Lord who delivered me from the teeth of that lion and the claws of that bear will surely now deliver me from this Philistine too. And it was so funny, as I read this the other night, because it says there's an exclamation point. It says T-O-O, an exclamation point, and I read that as Philistine tool. That's about right, isn't it? That's confidence. David's got confidence. So have confidence. God is going to take care of you. Number 2, the second thing that you need to remember is that you use the tools that God has given you now. I use the tools that God gave me now. I don't wait for something else that I don't have. I don't wait to see if I got enough money. I don't wait to see if I got enough education. I don't wait to see if I got enough connections or opportunities. I don't have this or I don't have that, and so I can't do this. And Wynn and I kind of did that for a long time. I said, I'd like to have another child. Lord, I really would like to have a little boy. And God said that wouldn't be prudent. So, but I didn't feel like we could have another child because because Mom wasn't there. Mom had passed away, and she was there with Wynn the whole time. But this little lady named Jerry Maturo said, I'll be there. And so that's when Cindy came about, and she was born right here in Enlow. And I had waited, that's why there's 10 years between Kelly and Cindy. So, because I kept waiting, I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know. You don't wait for the things that you don't have. You use what you have at the time. Some people are just waiting for something to happen. You don't just wait for your ship to come in. You swim out to the ship. Don't wait on that, because if you wait, you're going to wait a long, long time. So David, he goes to see Saul, and Saul says, if you're going to fight this guy, well, here, maybe you need to use my armor. Well, how ridiculous is that? Use Saul's armor. You remember when the people chose Saul because he was head and shoulders above the average person. So Saul's armor on David is ridiculous. It would have been comical just watching him put it on. But here's what happened. Then Saul dressed David in his own armor. But David said, I can't go out in these because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Instead, he chose 5 smooth stones for a sling. Raymond gave me one of those stones. I was looking for that, Raymond, and it's somewhere, I think in my desk somewhere, that he got while he was there in that Shephelah, in that valley. He picked up one of these little round stones, and it's an amazing, about the size of a .45 caliber bullet. Anyway, so David picks these things up. He says, I'm going to use my sling. I don't need armor. This is the way it is. So I just want to say this. When you start going after your dream, the dream that God has given you, some people are going to oppose you on it. They're going to be in opposition. Just understand that. But listen closely. Other people will say, yeah, that's a great idea. Go after your dream, but do it my way. And that's just as bad. You need to go after God's dream, God's way, your way. Don't do that. A lot of people in business, they look at what everybody else is doing. Well, let's do that. And they can't figure out why they failed because they didn't do something different. They didn't try anything different. Oftentimes, we need to follow what's different to be successful. Ecclesiastes 11:4 says that if you wait for perfect conditions, you will never get anything done. That is so true. I was trying to wait for these perfect conditions to have a child, and that's when Cindy came. Quit doing it. So how many would you agree with that verse? If you wait for perfect conditions, it's not going to happen. I think everybody should. Today's the day. You need to follow your dream. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till you got this. Don't wait till you have that. Use the tools that you have. When everybody else is saying you can't do it, that's discouragement. When you're full of doubt, are you going to trust God? And when there's this delay, people have held you back. And then when people disapprove of your dream, you just say, sorry, I've got to do what God's asking me to do. That's how you follow him. Third thing. The third thing that he did was he ignored the dream busters, and there are plenty of dream busters out there. You can see them all over the place. It's kind of interesting to me that as David's going to take on this giant that everybody else is scared to death of, that he didn't get any encouragement from anybody else. He didn't get encouragement from his dad. His dad certainly wasn't encouraging him. His dad was probably saying, where's that kid? These sheep are needing him, and he's out there fooling around, playing around. And, his mom didn't encourage him. We didn't read that. His brothers certainly didn't encourage him. The army, the soldiers who were scared to death, they didn't encourage him. Even the king, whose reputation was on the line, Saul's reputation, he didn't even encourage David. He didn't believe that David could do it. So what did he do? He had to encourage himself in the Lord. And sometimes when you're in the middle of the dream and you're up against all these things, here's what happened in 1 Samuel 30. Now, this is way farther into David's life. And these people are talking about stoning David. It said, when others were speaking against him, David encouraged himself in the Lord. So, my question is, do you do that? Do you encourage yourself in the Lord? Sometimes, if you're going after your dream, you got to learn how to encourage yourself in the Lord. You need to do that because most people are not going to do that for you. Sometimes you got to do that on your own. A lot of people say, well, just have a positive mental outlook. Well, sometimes, it's got to go way deeper than a positive mental outlook. You've got to, I'm not saying that positive thinking isn't good. It is good. But when you're in the depths, the darkest despair, somebody coming to you and say, well, the sun will come out tomorrow, or have a nice day. Just be positive thinker. I'm sorry, but when you're in those kind of problems, it seems those little cute sayings just seem a little shallow to me. Now, many of you know that Pastor Rick, his son Matthew, committed suicide several years ago. And I just want to read you what he said about this. He said, when you've had a son who struggled with mental illness for 27 years, all the positive thinking in the world is worthless. Just feel better. Put a smile on your face. Think good thoughts. Believe. Have fun. No. You need something far deeper than that. In the deepest, darkest days of your life, you need a bedrock of trust in God's grace, in God's love, in God's power, in God's sovereignty, in God's plan. You have to encourage yourself in the Lord because nobody else can give you that kind of encouragement. So number one, I remember how God has helped me in the past. Number two, I use the tools that God's given me now. Number three, I ignore the dream busters. And finally, the fourth thing, I expect God to help me for His glory, not for my glory. And this is what you've got to do. This is, when you're going after that dream, this is the faith factor. I love what David says to Goliath as he runs onto the battlefield. And David runs on and he's shouting. He says this here in 45 to 47. David shouted to Goliath, "You come at me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty. Today the Lord will conquer you." He's not saying, "I'm going to beat you. I'm not going to whip up on you." He says, "The Lord's going to do this. And the whole world will know that there is a God. And everyone will know that the Lord doesn't need weapons to rescue His people. It is His battle, not ours." So, are you fighting God's battle and you're wondering why you're so tired? It is His battle, not ours, and the Lord will give you to us. Alex found that out. I saw God work in his life. It's God's battle. No matter how we work at it, only God can get you through it. So what are you expecting God to do in your life? What are you doing? Without even knowing you, I can tell you this. God is doing exactly what you expect Him to do. No more and no less. Why? Because every time that God moves out of heaven to do a miracle on earth, it's because somebody believed. You have to believe. You have to have faith. That is what's going to happen. The Bible says, according to your faith it will be done unto you. The Bible says, the just shall live by faith. It also says, without faith it is impossible to please God. It also says, whatever is not of faith is sin. So according to your faith it will be done to you. You get to choose how much God blesses your life. It's based on how much you choose to trust God. I don't have to be the smartest person in life. I don't have to be the best looking person, although I am. No, I'm kidding. I don't have to be the wealthiest person. I certainly ain't that. I've got the choice to trust in God, and you do too. Whatever is not of faith is sin. David says, I expect God to help me for His glory. I want, as we finish this 50 days of transformation, I want you to hear Pastor Rick's testimony from this very sermon. He can do it way better than I could. Take a listen.
Whatever is not of faith is sin. He said, I expect God to help me for His glory. I made this decision when I was a young man. And in the mountains of Northern California, one night I got down on my knees. And as a young man, I said, God, I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most educated, and I'm not the best looking, and I'm not the most talented. But God, by your grace, I'm going to trust you. And I don't have to know or understand why you tell me to do what you want me to do. But I will do anything, anytime, anywhere, in faith, even when it doesn't make sense to me. And what an adventure my life has been. I would have never imagined as a teenager that one day I would stand and speak to a crowd like this, much less to all of our campuses around the world. Because this group right here is about 5 times bigger than the town I grew up in. I'm a country boy with a slingshot. And God says, I will use anybody who will trust me and say, I expect God to use me, not because of who I am, but for his glory, that God knows and the world knows that there is a God. I'll never forget looking into my wife's eyes many years ago as we were finishing up school in Texas. And I said, "Kay, I think God has given me a dream, and it is to be a pastor. And I think we're supposed to go to Southern California, to a place we've never been, and start a church with no money, no members, no building, no support. And I've never been a senior pastor." And I said, "What do you think about that dream?" And she looked into my eyes and she says, "It scares me to death. But I believe in God, and I believe in you. So let's go. Let's go for it." Now, I've often thought, how would history be different if my wife had said no? If she'd been afraid and scared and said, "Let's don't do it." There would be no Saddleback Church. There would be no purpose-driven life. There would be no movement of churches in 160 nations. There would be no peace plan. Thousands of people that are going to heaven now would not be headed to heaven. You have no idea how much your unbelief could be limiting somebody you love. Is your unbelief limiting your wife? Is your unbelief limiting your husband? Is your unbelief limiting your child? Don't be Jesse. Don't hold them back when God has a great dream for their life. It's not your dream for them. It's God's dream for them. And you need to say, "I'm not going to let anybody else's unbelief hold me back, and I'm not going to let my unbelief hold anybody else back." Let's bow for prayer.
I thought that was important that you heard that, because there's a lot of truth in that. Sometimes we can't let unbelief hold us back. Let's pray together. And I want you to pray this prayer with me. Something like, just, "Dear God, you've helped me many times in the past. You've helped me through the things I thought I'd never get out of, but you helped me. And if you helped me in the past, I know, God, that you're going to help me in the future. Help me to remember all these things and to draw my confidence from it. Even when people discourage me or disapprove of me, or even when people misunderstand me, help me use the tools that you've given me right now. Not to wait for the perfect time and the perfect place and the perfect tool, but to use the slingshot and the stones that I have right now. Help me not to wear somebody else's armor, God, but just go in your strength. And Lord, help me to ignore the dream busters, and help me to start every day with a time alone with you, so that I will encourage myself in you. I don't need the encouragement of other people, because I'm encouraging myself in the Lord and spending time with you. Help me expect you to help me, not for my glory, God, but for yours. That the whole world will know that there is a God, and that everyone will know that the Lord doesn't need weapons to rescue his people. Lord, I've been tired because I've been trying to fight the battles as if they're mine. These battles are yours. I want to relax and trust that you'll give me the victory. And Jesus Christ, I invite you into every room in my life. The living room, the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, wherever. I want you to run every area of my life. I want you to be the manager and the Lord from this day forward. Father, I thank you in advance that the giants will fall and the dream will come true. And I pray this in your name. Amen. What giants have you been allowing to let you be held back? Let's stand together. We always take a time of invitation. We didn't last week because it was so late, but